Housing Studies of Harvard University. He has appeared as a guest on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Thank you, Dr. Yoon, for joining.
Thank you, Kaylee, for the introduction and also for sponsoring the event. Thank you, Chairman Robert, for inviting me to share some of my thoughts with the great realtors in Colorado. Well, 2020 is over, and what a unique year. Back in the March, April time period, tremendous amount of fear, uncertainty about the direction of the economy and the housing market. Yet the second half, what a surprise. Housing sector, one of the few bright sectors of the economy. Consumers are viewing housing as something special, like something truly special in terms of spending for remodeling, upgrading, maybe staying in shelter as people are spending more time at home. They are looking at things, but it's not only about fixing things. People are saying, heck, I want to get a new home. So the demand for new home has really risen and completely surprised on the positive side. Now we are in 2021. What can we anticipate? Will the momentum continue? What about the inventory shortage? We know that if we had more inventory, we can get more sales done. So are we going to begin to see more supply come onto the market? Well, there's still some uncertainty, but also there's a better reasoning to suggest that 2021 looks to be another bright year for the housing sector. As an economist, I speak better with PowerPoint slides, so let me put that onto the screen. So please bear with me as I upload it onto the screen. Okay, there we go. So let me first start with the true driver for confidence in America, which is jobs. And this chart shows for the US, past 20 years. And what it shows is that in the first decade, from year 2000 to 2010, there was some artificial job creation. I can say now as being artificial job creation because hindsight is a 2020 vision. We know what happened. Subprime lending, those funny mortgages that overstretch people's budget, or one could get a mortgage even without income documentation, an adjustable rate mortgage that began to reset at higher interest rate with each passing month, it was going to collapse. And it did crash, and it led to the foreclosure situation. And we had job losses, Great Recession. But from the low point in 2010, America experienced the longest economic expansion ever, 10 straight years of job creation. You can say President Obama, President Trump, right before the pandemic, the greatest economic expansion in the US history, 10 straight years of job creation. But in a single month of a lockdown, in month of April, we lost all that job. 10 years of job progress gone in a single month. But as the economy began to reopen from the lockdown, jobs steadily began to return. But as you can see, we are only halfway recovered. We need another 10 million jobs to get us back up to normal. This chart is for the US. The red line is a reference point for year 2000, foreclosure crisis, and the lockdown in April of last year. Here's Colorado. So Colorado job market condition looks something similar, especially in the first half of the decade, from year 2000 to 2010. Artificial job creation, foreclosure crisis, but from the low point, 10 straight years of job creation and the lockdown. But note how Colorado is much ahead of the red line, red reference line. Let me go back to the US so that you can compare. This is the US, and this is Colorado, to indicate Colorado has been one of the fastest growing states in the whole country. More job creation, more new residents coming in, whether from Chicago, from California, many more people coming into Colorado than leaving, such that job market condition was very solid. which was the reason why Colorado was one of the hottest housing market before the pandemic. Now, during the pandemic and coming out of it, is following some national patterns, but again, positive surprise. But the reason why Colorado was doing so well even before the pandemic was the job creation had been much stronger compared to rest of the country. Let me show you the 50 map chart. This is not a 20-year job situation, but the past year, December of 2019 to most recently available data, December of 2020. How is the jobs? And you see in Colorado it's down 5.4%, which is around national average. So at least during the period of the pandemic, Colorado is matching up with the US average. But look at the nearby state. Utah actually has more jobs today compared to 1 year ago. Same in Idaho. If you look at the New England states, it's down much more severely because whether it is because of the colder weather, people cannot go to restaurant dining outdoors, or it's because the governors in these states had a longer lockdown in a more restrictive way. One can say something similar in California, more restrictive lockdown, so the job market is taking a hit. While the southern states, whether Texas, Georgia, Carolinas, it is down more minimally because the governors there were much more relaxing about reopening the economy. But of course, the virus situation is getting out of control. I guess it's getting out of control everywhere across the country. But Colorado currently, at least the past 12 months, roughly about the national average. If we look at the jobs in a different way, this shows the month-to-month job change. So April, we lost 20 million jobs, then jobs recovery, but note how it was fizzling out towards the end of the year. October, small job creation, November, very visible, and December, it is actually negative. And that's why it was critical to pass the second stimulus bill, the one that President Trump signed at the end of December, $600, I think is already in your bank deposit per person, small business loan, and the unemployment insurance additional amount that's coming in. And again, I want to thank all the leadership position at the state and local association, including the chair, Robert Walkowicz, I'm sure I mispronounced the last name, who have told us that in the next stimulus bill, or the one in December, please push for rental assistance, because one cannot have simple eviction moratorium where people are not paying rent. And what is the landlord to do? And we are finding in the data that 80% of the properties, investor properties, are small mom and pop investors. They're not Wall Street investors. So if they cannot collect rents on those single family homes, what are the small landowners to do? That is why in the December stimulus package, it included rental subsidy. And therefore, your tenant should be able to pay rents on time now. Just in case your tenant is lazy, landlord can file on their behalf to collect those rents. The administrative process, if there's a variation by state, but please contact the Colorado Housing Authority to get more information on how to collect rents for those tenants who are unable to pay rent on their own, because rental subsidy was part of the stimulus package. Interesting part of this recession also is that this is the first recession in American history where people's income on average is higher now compared to pre-pandemic. I know that there are many families struggling paycheck to paycheck, worrying about grocery bill, worrying about the next housing payment. But on average, Americans have more income now compared to pre-pandemic because of the massive stimulus package, the first one that went out in April, enhanced unemployment benefit for those several months, along with the second stimulus package that was passed in December. With the Biden administration, there's likely to be a third larger stimulus package coming very soon. So a very unique situation such that on average, Americans actually have more income during a recession for the very first time than before the recession. But of course, it's not equally distributed. And there are some families who are truly struggling, but there are many families who are actually better off during this recession. What are people doing with this extra stimulus check? They're not spending it all. First, you cannot go see the Broncos play or the Nuggets play. And also people cannot go to a restaurant. You cannot travel as frequently as before. So people are just saving the money. Savings rate currently at 15% is about twice the normal, which also means once the vaccine is truly distributed, medical experts believe that half of America will be vaccinated by summer, another quarter by autumn, which means that we will be in herd immunity by autumn, so back to normal, able to see the ball games, go to the restaurant, travel. So all this savings could be unleashed back into the economy for a strong economic performance once the vaccine is distributed. The reason why the Biden administration wants to do a third round of stimulus is that, well, vaccine, it will take time. Until for the next 6 months, economy still needs another shot in the arm in terms of the stimulus package, and that's why they will be pushing for it. And let's see what kind of negotiation is conducted with the Congress, Senate, House of Representatives in terms of the next stimulus. As an economist, I always put in mind, there's no such thing as free lunch. So if there is additional stimulus, it means higher budget deficit, higher national debt, more printing of the money. It's not a free lunch. And the bond market is already acting up some degree, which means that interest rates, mortgage rate, the absolute mortgage rate that you saw in December may be over. That does not mean the mortgage rate will rise in any alarming way. I anticipate mortgage rate may be around 3% average middle of the year, certainly very attractive rates, but it will be above the 2.7% average that we saw in December. But there is a great potential for economy to perform well with the stimulus package in the first 6 months of this year, and then the vaccination and unleashing of this savings into the economy in the second half of the year. Let me now turn to the great news of the housing. Look at that U-turn that housing market show. So during the lockdown, it went down. And I know many of you were very fearful of the market condition. What's going to happen? But then as the governors reopened the economy, consumers bounced back, and then some. Home sales actually rising higher than pre-pandemic activity. I know in Colorado, pre-pandemic was a hot market, but now it has become even hotter because buyers truly came back to the market. What about new home construction? Builders are smiling. You build it, they have no trouble finding a buyer. In fact, in the late autumn, home sales for new constructions were running about 40% above 1 year ago. So very good condition for the builders. Build it, they have no trouble finding a buyer. What do realtors say to their clients to demonstrate seriousness in this competitive market? Get a mortgage approval. So what are the consumers doing? They're following your advice, applying for mortgages to buy a home, and it is up 20% from 1 year ago, which means that there are plenty of buyers in the pipeline ready to hit the marketplace or hitting the marketplace right now. This winter will be one of the strongest winter home sales activity based on the trends we are seeing in mortgage application. So very, very good momentum factor. By the way, this data only includes mortgages to buy a home and not refinance. And I hope many of the homeowners already refinance, further improving on your personal finance conditions. But mortgage to buy a home up solidly. Let me focus your attention now on the other red arrow, straight line arrow that is drifting slightly downward. This is in 2018. People are applying for mortgages a little less in 2018. New home purchase declining in 2018. What about MLS transactions declining in 2018? So what was happening in 2018 to nudge the sales a little downward? Wasn't it part of the great economy, that 10 straight years of job creation? And answer is yes, but something else was happening. And what was happening was that mortgage rate in 2018 increased from 4% at the beginning of the year to 5% by year end, to show how sensitive the housing sector is to changes in mortgage rates. You can have a great economy, but if the mortgage rate rise, it will choke off buyers. Why are the sales surging in recent months? Look at the mortgage rate, all-time low of 2.7%. That is why home sales are surging. Please keep in mind, again, I am already seeing some reaction in the bond market where bond yields are rising, which means that mortgage rates inevitably will follow that trend. So in the upcoming months, you may see slightly higher, maybe a decimal point or two higher in terms of mortgage rates. Any of your consumers who are saying, I want to wait to see how far mortgage rate will decline, well, it may be a bad decision because I think the low point may have already been reached. Strong demand also is pushing up prices. The median prices are rising 13%. There's something called Case-Shiller Price Index, which control for constant quality. That is rising roughly about 10%. And the median price is reflecting some skewness in the data as people are buying more expensive home, larger size home, so it's lifting the median. But the Case-Shiller data is also saying that price appreciation is roughly about 10%. So this means that homeowners first are smiling. On average, they have seen about $25,000 in equity gain. Just by being homeowner, home price appreciation, they have accumulated about $25,000. It also means for some of your past clients who are in difficult job market situation, they don't have a job, they're in mortgage forbearance period, I hope they can find a job in the next few months with a stimulus package and with the vaccine on the way. But if they cannot find a job, it does not need to go to foreclosure. They would simply do a normal home sales because of sizable price appreciation. You do a foreclosure when the prices are falling, but right now many people have housing equity, so they would just do a normal home sales. But let's hope for the best that they can find job and get out of the mortgage forbearance period. In fact, our estimation on housing wealth is that currently the homeowners has about $288,000 in wealth, while renters is minuscule, only $6,000. So the first data point is actual by the Federal Reserve. The second data point, it is an NAR estimate given that Federal Reserve has no new information. Another interesting development this winter is that market is very swift. Usually during holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, people want to have nice dinner. But what's happening this year is that they're having dinner with their cell phone right next by to see any new listings coming onto the market. If the new listings are coming on, it's being signed, contract signed quickly. So the days on the market, very, very swift this winter. And the reason why it's swift is we simply don't have enough inventory. And this is the reason why prices are rising. That is why it is so important that we have more inventory coming onto the market. And this chart shows where the inventories are falling. It's falling on the lower price point. And that's where the sales are struggling because of lack of inventory. But on the upper price point, we are getting a little more inventory, that light yellow part. And therefore, the sales are rising much more strongly. In fact, million and over, the home sales are doubling compared to 1 year ago. So we need more inventory to get the market more fluid and get it moving. Are we going to get more inventory? It requires home builders to build more homes. And builders have been underproducing for 13 straight years. The cumulative effect of underproduction for multiple years is we don't have enough homes for sale, housing shortage. But the good news is that builders are beginning to break ground a little more now than before, and therefore we should anticipate more inventory by middle of this year. It still takes time, about 6 months to build a home, so it will take some time, but right now the housing start is beginning to break out. It's not going to be a balanced market condition. It just means that we face acute housing shortage, but maybe the most acute housing shortage period is now coming to an end, and it will still be a seller's market as we get more inventory because demand is still strong, but we are not going to erase 13 years of underproduction in a single year. It's going to take about 2 or 3 years to truly get us to the balanced market condition. And thankfully, the builders are focusing on where the consumers are desiring, which is the blue, single-family new home construction, and not the apartment or condominium. So a single family is doing much better compared to the condominium or the apartment sector. The builders did face some challenges because the lumber prices really skyrocketed. The Biden administration is saying, buy American, buy American. But let's remember, we had the wildfire out in the western states. So only way to lower the lumber prices is to import, say, Canadian lumber. So by bringing more Canadian lumber into the country, it will mean more job creation in Fort Collins, more job creation in Colorado Springs, more job creation in Aspen, because we need to build more homes. It means job creation. So in cases where we cannot have a domestic lumber, we should bring in foreign lumber, like Canadian lumber, in order to help the builders be more incentivized to produce more. Let me now change the topic about work from home and change in locational preference. Demand for office is collapsing. Even the companies that are beginning to expand, they are saying, well, if we're not going to use office, people are working from home, why do we need office space? So office demand has really collapsed. This also shows that for commercial real estate practitioners, it's been quite a challenging year, whether doing the retail space, hotel, or office. Warehouse is strong, but shopping centers, office, a very difficult situation. But it also means the following. We took a survey of realtors about their clients. Where do they want to buy a home? And we are finding strong interest out in the suburbs, exurbs, rural towns or small towns where things are more affordable and away from city centers. Maybe they sense that this work from home could be a normal feature of the post-pandemic economy, even after the vaccine. I think many CEOs will struggle to say, do we say to the workers to come to office every single day? Or do we say, come to office 2 days a week when we have a lot of meetings, but other 3 days, I know you can work productively from home, you have demonstrated. And if that is the case, why do you need to have homes so close to Denver downtown when one could commute from further distances? So this will begin to benefit from more outlying regions as people are saying, if commuting is not as important, then I can seek out better affordability, farther away, larger size homes. So this could be a trend. Resort recreation area should be less than 10%, but now popping in at 13%. In fact, let me show you this chart. We look at the home sales growth between normal counties versus counties that cater to vacation homes. And what we are finding is home sales in vacation counties are doing better in terms of the sales growth. 22% increase versus only 5% increase in, say, major metropolitan areas. Whether it is the north of Atlanta in the Smoky Mountains, the Mid-Atlantic Beach Coast, Lake Tahoe, and certainly the Great Mountain areas, the Rocky Mountains of the Eagle County, Aspen, Vail, Colorado, the nearby, I forget the name. I know a very good realtor from this area, but now I just forget the name of this nearby. Well, from people from Denver, they just commute for 2 hours and do a lot of skiing. But this area is seeing a strong interest because work from home can also mean work from vacation home. How would the boss know whether I am at home or at vacation home? Why should the boss care? So knowing that this work from home could become work from vacation home, or at least utilize vacation home more frequently, we are seeing far greater demand in the vacation counties. Let me wrap it up to say the forecast. 2020, the middle column, is we face recession. We're still tallying up some numbers, so not all the data is in, but it's gonna show the economy went down, we lost jobs, interest rates are low, no inflation. 2021, because of the stimulus package and probably more stimulus package under Biden administration and the vaccine distribution, economy will definitely be positive, almost guaranteed. Job creation is coming around. Interest rate will still be relatively low, but inflation may begin to nudge up from so much printing of the money, but not a real concern yet. Maybe 5 years from now, maybe inflation does become a concern, but not yet. As related to the housing sector, what a remarkable year. 2020, mortgage rates averaging 3%, new home sales up 20%, existing home sales, even as we missed the critical home buying season in spring, second half made up for it, and then some, so we squeaked out a 3% gain. Home prices positive, 2021. Interest rate may be a decimal point or two higher, nothing alarming. New home sales up another 20%. Existing home sales, I'm looking at about 10% gain. And home prices positive, but we need that more inventory, so let's get the builders going. And the builders, whatever they build, they can easily make those sales, and it will eventually come into the multiple listing service as an inventory. So thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention. Now I'm going to turn it back to Chair Robert.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. It is always a pleasure to have your insight. And just to let you know, the mountains are getting some snow. You know, that'll probably make you smile. It's a lot of data. Now that we've heard the national update, let's focus on Colorado. Please help me welcome our next speaker. Patty Silverstein is the President and Chief Economist of Development Research Partners, a Jefferson County, Colorado-based real estate analysis and economic development research company founded in 1994. Ms. Silverstein's expertise is in economic research and economic development, including industry cluster studies and strategic economic development planning. She has extensive experience in preparing economic and fiscal impact analysis for community development purposes. In addition, she serves as the consulting chief economist for the Metro Denver Economic Development Corp and the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. Wow. In these roles, she compiles, interprets, and forecasts economic and demographic data for the Denver metropolitan area and performs in-depth research on issues and proposed developments impacting the region. Without further ado, please help me welcome Patty Silverstein.
Thank you so much, Robert. It is a delight to be here with you all today. I wish it were in person, but you know, we're all saying that all the time, right? So anyway, I want to share today with you about what we see happening here in Colorado, and I'm actually going to go into a lot of the different areas of the state as well. So this will be kind of fun, and I look forward to your questions, your comments. There's the chat feature that I know Robert is going to be monitoring and everything. You know, if there's something that comes up during my presentation that you want to talk about even more, great, let us know. Otherwise, we'll also do kind of some Q&A at the end, okay? So with that, let's jump on in. So presentation this year, I'm talking about tracking the Great Divide. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about this whole, what is the shape of the recovery? Is it going to be a check mark or a swoosh or what? And a lot of folks have been talking about this whole K-shape. Well, I would suggest that this whole K-shape is not necessarily a recovery framework, but it is more of a framework of where we have been and where we are. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail, because certainly tracking what is happening with this whole K-shape within our economy, I think is important for understanding where we can eventually go as well. Dr. Yoon had already really covered a lot of what is happening at the national situation, the global situation. I just want to put in my own 2 cents worth here a little bit, just to kind of set the stage for what we see as the framework, what we see as the baseline conditions from which we are operating. Obviously, from the whole global situation, the story is what is going on with COVID. That is what dominates our ability to increase our economies, our ability to travel, to get out there, to conduct business as usual at all. But there is the vaccine. In our forecast, our expectation is that by the end of this summer, we will see widespread vaccine distribution, widespread herd immunity, if you will. But again, it's getting to that point, getting through that next 6 months that is really going to be the challenge. And we'll talk about that here. Nonetheless, the expectation then is after a significant drop in global economic activity in 2020, that we'll start to see improvement everywhere in 2021. Notice that the only economy that from the International Monetary Fund in their World Economic Outlook, the only economy that they were really seeing getting a little bit of growth, if you will, in 2020 was the Chinese economy. And that because we know that they were a little bit ahead of the rest of the globe and everything else too in dealing with COVID. But again, the expectation is everybody will be growing throughout 2021. But as Dr. Yoon had mentioned, this comes at a cost. We have been tracking nearly $6 trillion in relief funds that have been infused from the federal government sources through direct payments, through grants, through loans, through tax relief. The Federal Reserve has been very active in this as well, again, through infusing a lot of loan funds available, but also maintaining that federal funds rate at a very low level, trying to make sure that companies that need that those additional infusion of funds can get it at a relatively low cost. This, of course, is leading to a federal budget deficit that is increasing and to a total debt level. Then when we add all of those deficits over the years together, our total debt level coming up to about $27 trillion, which is 127% of our GDP. Some people look at this and say, oh my gosh, we can't continue this type of expenditure pattern. You know, we're bankrupting things. You know, if your house is on fire, you don't worry about how much water you use to put that fire out. And that's kind of the attitude right now, is that we are doing everything that we can to keep the economy functioning, to keep our households afloat, and kind of we'll worry about the other things later, if you will. In terms of GDP, then our broadest measure of economic activity, yes, the drop that we had in 2020 has been very steep. Our expectation is that we'll see a little over a 4% decline in terms of GDP, which is a more severe annualized decline than what we saw during the Great Recession. But if misery loves company, you'd have to go back to the 1930s, the 1940s, and you would see even steeper declines in our national GDP at that point. Our expectation in 2021 is that we will see a near 4% increase then in activity. And again, these are the annualized types of figures as opposed to looking at it from a quarterly basis, because you draw the charts at a quarterly basis and they're just wild to look at right about now. But annualized, we expect a little over 4% growth then next year. So I want to focus a lot on what is happening with our labor force and employment. We're going to talk about our participation rates, unemployment claims, employment by industry. And this really starts to set the framework then for that conversation about what I call the Great Divide, if you will. So even prior to COVID, we've always had an economic structure, and Colorado is not unique. I mean, this is something that is going on certainly all across the country. But we have an economic structure that our households earn very varying levels of income depending upon what industry you are working within. So this takes a look at, and many of the subsequent charts, so I just want to spend a few minutes kind of laying the groundwork here. So all companies, all businesses that operate are classified into one of these super sectors. The information sector, which is our highest paid sector in Colorado. Our information sector includes a lot of our print media. It includes our telecommunications industry, but it also includes a lot of the high-tech industries, because a lot of those high-tech industries are the ones that are responsible for disseminating information. So when you look at a lot of your Google search functions and that type of thing for the internet, they're getting classified there in the information sector. On down to at the bottom of the chart, our leisure and hospitality sector is the one where we see the lowest average weekly wage. Leisure and hospitality being all of those restaurants, all of those hotels, all of our venues where we go to be entertained, our museums, our concert halls, our various our zoos, and all of those types of activities are all classified there within that leisure and hospitality sector. And again, that is a sector where we tend to see the lowest average wages, with a caveat. On the restaurant side, this does not include tips and all. And tips can certainly be significant for various workers in there. But the way these average weekly wages are calculated, it is not coming through in there. So I've classified then all of our various industries, our super sectors, from our highest wage there with the information side down to our lowest, leisure and hospitality, and dividing it into 3 different groups then. Kind of our high average weekly wage, which is the green part, the middle wages, which is the yellow part there, manufacturing, our government workers, construction, transportation, warehousing, utilities, and then those red ones, those lower average weekly wages there. So in Colorado, this shakes out to be about 30% of our employment base is in the high wages, about a third in the middle wages, and then about 39% in the low wages. And we'll keep kind of coming back to that to explain why we're seeing kind of this great divide in terms of as we start to recover here from the influence of COVID. Before we talk about our employment base, let's talk about who our labor force is, our workers out here. So the labor force participation rate is the rate that we take a look at all the population 16 years and older. There's no upper bound to it. But there is that lower bound in terms of age. And what percentage of all of those folks are actually either actively working or looking for a job, okay? When COVID hit, you can see those numbers jump down in terms of labor force participation. So in about April of 2020, we saw a decline in that labor force participation. There were many folks that said, whoa, I am out of here. I am going to sit this one out. And whether that was a voluntary choice or in many instances too, especially when you take a look at the female labor force participation rate, it was almost required that they sit this one out because they had to become those caregivers for children that were now doing school remotely or providing care for other members of their household. And I don't mean to suggest that it's only females that are staying home with kids or anything, but our data kind of shows that that is predominantly in a household who has been responsible for more of the caregiving. What we have seen because of this is that the male labor force participation rate is almost back to where it had been pre-COVID. But the female labor force participation rate is still down by about 2 percentage points. So, and again, when you look at this participation rate, it swings up and down a lot with where we have seen various business restrictions being introduced. So the good news out of all of this, I think, is that Colorado generally has a higher labor force participation rate than the national average. That means that our population is really sitting there ready to go once again when we get kind of that all clear. As a result of that, we saw large increases in the unemployment rate to begin with, but we're starting to see that retreat a little bit once again. This has been kind of painful for us here in Colorado, though. In Colorado back in February of 2020, so think back a year ago to life as we knew it at that point. Back at that point in time, Colorado had the third lowest unemployment rate in the country. Now, this was November data, Colorado ranks at number 31. So why the big variation? Well, what also happened pre-COVID, or what the situation pre-COVID, is Colorado had the 7th highest concentration of leisure and hospitality employment in the country. And we all know that that has been the industry that has been very significantly impacted by COVID. So it's not surprising then that our unemployment rates have gone up and stayed a little bit higher than we would have liked them to. Regardless, the unemployment rate here in Colorado does tend to be lower than the national average, and we expect that that is a trend that will continue out into 2021. So part of another measure of what is happening with unemployment, and something that we have been watching very closely throughout this whole experience here, is what is happening with our initial unemployment claims and our continuing unemployment claims. Because the unemployment rate data comes out once a month, the initial claims data, the continued claims data was available weekly. Our Colorado Department of Labor was really putting that out there every week so that we could track what was happening in sort of real time, if you will. So not surprisingly, back in March and April, we saw significant increases in initial claims. Again, if you go on unemployment insurance, you have to first, you file an initial claim, then you go through the whole approvals process and that type of thing. Once you have been approved, then you go into a continuing weeks claim, so that you have to still justify that you are able to receive unemployment insurance, but you get counted a little differently. So anyway, big jump up in the initial claims that started tapering off again until about the end of November, beginning of December, when we saw again more restrictive business operations moving into place. That's when we saw that green line, the initial claims, start to jump up a little bit again. The continued weeks claims, of course, follows with a little bit of a lag in what we see originally in the initial claims. Now, I draw your attention to that kind of December timeframe and all. One of the challenges of this has been the Colorado system has been experiencing a lot of fraud in terms of unemployment insurance claims. They have a new system that it was just being introduced, so we're hoping that some of those checks, those red flags, if you will be able to be identified a little more quickly, and that we will start to see less of that fraudulent activity. But that is certainly something that was influencing this. Also, in the initial claims data, where you see that green line going down, towards the end of December, there was also the fact that what was called pandemic unemployment assistance, that's basically now unemployment insurance for our gig workers, for those 1099 employees. Because of a delay in signing the bill at the federal level, there have been a few weeks where those gig workers could not file for unemployment insurance too. So we saw some decline in that. So don't be surprised too, now as this system is getting back up and running again, that we see a little bit of uptick in that activity once again. So going back to that whole idea then of what are the wages then that people are earning. Again, taking a look at the high wage, mid wage, and low wage for the percentage of claims that were filed in about the middle of December, noticed that 53% of the claims that were filed for unemployment insurance were in those lower wage industries, 19% in the mid-wage, and starting to see some increases too, even in the high wage. But I would also point out that professional and business services, which is that fourth category down where you saw a big increase in activity there, professional and business services, not only is that a lot of your legal and accounting professions, a lot of your computer software design professions are in there as well. It also includes many of the administrative and facility services. So any of your janitorial services, that type of thing would also be classified in there. So oftentimes many of those positions tend to be a little lower wage positions as well, but they're getting lumped in with a very high wage type of sector. So again, this is because of what we have happening right now then. At that top end, going back to our K-shape, at the top end, again, those high wage types of positions, we tend to see more employment activity. And at the lower wage categories, more of the unemployment activity. Dr. Yoon had kind of beat me on this one. He had already updated his chart to include the December data that just came out last Friday. I'm sorry, I had not updated the map here yet, but definitely pointing out, and this is the same trend as what he was seeing there, our top states in terms of employment growth right now, those that are in the lighter shades of yellow here. Number one, Idaho. Number two, Utah. Well, here in Colorado, from an economic development standpoint, we keep very, very close tabs on those areas. We tend to see that these regions being very competitive to us in terms of where companies are looking to grow, expand. That has been a region that has been very attractive. Utah in particular, very innovative. Idaho, keep in mind, coming from a very small employment base, or a much smaller employment base than what we have here in Colorado or Utah. But nonetheless, November was the first month since April. So back in April of 2020, we saw that all states were losing jobs on an over-the-year basis. Idaho was the first state in November to actually post an increase in employment activity compared to the prior year. Now, again, strong competitor, but nonetheless, I think that this points out that, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, a lot of this is influenced too by the degree of openness of the various economies and what type of business restrictions are in place. And so one of the things that has been really hard about comparing Colorado's position is our rate of openness of the economy has really nothing to do perhaps with the rate of openness in other parts of the country. So it's really hard to make apples to apples comparisons of a lot of the data right now. Anyway, Colorado, though, we rank number 22. That kind of hurts. Colorado has generally been a state where our employment growth has tracked in the top 10 of states all across the country. So the fact that we're now kind of middle of the pack is something that's a little painful for us, perhaps. But again, this goes back to the whole idea that prior to COVID, we had the 7th highest concentration of leisure and hospitality employment in the country. This is a slightly different take on a chart two that Dr. Yoon had showed, just comparing now the Great Recession with our COVID recession. And if you can kind of see my cursor here, you will see that in the COVID recession, our employment, oh dear, I lost it there. Let's see if I can go back. Yes, our employment just dropped off the cliff there. 343,000 jobs in Colorado that were lost over the course of 3 months. Now the question is, how long is it going to take us to fill this back up, to get back up to here? Well, we can look kind of at history and say, okay, during the Great Recession, it took us 38 months to recover all of the jobs that had been lost. So basically, getting back to that point there took us 38 months. In this COVID recession, yes, we started to see a good pop-up in activity early on, as especially in kind of the spring or more summer type of time frame, as we started to reopen businesses. Those were the easy jobs to get back. Now the question is, how long will it take us to get back some of those harder positions? Yes, there's still going to be some easy jobs too within that whole leisure and hospitality industry. As business restrictions change and that type of thing, we'll be able to lift up. But again, there's still going to be some harder positions. There have been companies that have seen their whole livelihood just absolutely devastated from this. And many of those companies may not be able to reopen again. So certainly there are some losses in there, some business losses, some employment losses that are going to be a little harder to bring back. So if we presume that our recovery takes at about the same length as the Great Recession, if we looked out 36 months from that April of 2020 timeframe when we started to see all those losses, it could be April 2023. It could be 3 years to see all of those jobs being recovered throughout the state. However, I do think that this recovery is going to be a little bit faster than what we saw. I mean, yes, there are going to be challenges. Yes, there are going to be fits and starts all along the way. Nonetheless, I'm more expecting that it'll be kind of the end of 2022, though, before we are fully recovered. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to start feeling better. Once we have that vaccine in our arms or have developed some type of herd immunity there, we will start to see a general reopening of the economy, a general improvement. So we're going to start feeling better from an economic standpoint by about the middle of this year. But do know it is still a long slog ahead to get back all of those jobs that indeed we have lost. So again, taking a look at where industries we see growing, changing, I want to point out a few things that give us some real reasons for optimism in terms of what we have happening here in Colorado. So this is data through December. It's preliminary data for 2020. What that means is that these numbers that I show you today, once we go through what is called a whole benchmarking process of the data, it's going to look kind of different come March of 2020, because it's March that we get all of the benchmarked data. Our expectation is that even right now, those preliminary numbers are showing a decline here in Colorado of just about 120,000 people. Don't be surprised that with the revised numbers that come out in March, that loss is even steeper. We're expecting that the loss here in Colorado is going to be along the lines of around 130,000. So don't despair. Just expect that that's what's going to happen. So in terms of our employment, though, those reasons for feeling like, okay, we are going to get through this. One of our high wage categories, professional and business services, our employment in 2020 is still higher than what we have experienced in 2019. That is good news. When you think about it, all of those professional and business services that are serving as a foundation for other company operations, if they are starting to grow and expand, we have a strong foundation from which all other businesses can start to increase. Manufacturing, this we're seeing basically a flat type of position right now. This is still really good news for us. And a few industries in particular that I want to highlight that have really been kind of rock stars during this whole 2020 experience. On the manufacturing side, our bioscience industry has been incredibly important. We have many companies that have been working on research related to COVID, developing vaccines or developing other types of therapeutics related to COVID, that happening right here in Colorado. So that has been really one of the shining stars then throughout this whole experience, that part of manufacturing. Also aerospace. You know, Colorado, we have the second largest aerospace economy in the country. We are second only to the state of California in terms of the number of people that work in that industry. And we have seen some very significant increases in aerospace recently. You know, companies like Lockheed Martin and Ball Aerospace, Sierra Nevada, that have been increasing their employment base here. So again, that has been really important. Another sector on the manufacturing side is our food and beverage industry. You know, we're still eating and drinking. So our producers within that segment have still been very busy as well. They have been increasing their employment. So this again has been a story of there are some real shining stars, some real opportunities, versus, again, if you take a look at the bottom, those lower wage categories, we're seeing significant declines in leisure and hospitality, retail trade also declining, other services, which is a lot of those other personal services. So think of your favorite hair salon or nail salon or massage and spa areas, all of those being classified within those other services, and those have been a challenge. But again, some good news that many of our higher wage types of industries have very solid performance, and we hope that those industries too will be able to really spring back in once we get to that kind of middle of the year type of standpoint. Again, looking at then the low wage, middle wage, high wage, notice that our high wage positions are very close to being back to where they had been, versus our low wage positions are still down by about 9% there. Add all this together. Our expectation for Colorado then is that we will see the loss of about 130,000 jobs in 2020, again, with that whole revised data, versus here in 2021, we expect that we will see about an increase of about 68,000 jobs. So again, we will not have added back all of the jobs that we had lost, but we're on a good, solid track, and we'll start to feel better come the middle of the year. And this looks at it just from another standpoint, that the jobs that have been lost during the COVID recession are some of the most severe job losses that Colorado has ever experienced in a single year of economic activity, coming back to something that is going to be more of a normal-ish type of growth trend for the state. All right, so I want to focus on, I just have to take a step back and admit that I am a numbers geek. I love this stuff. I hope you all are loving this stuff too as we talk about this, because I think it's really important as you are working with that family or that individual that is looking to buy their new home, buy their first home, buy a change. You know, oftentimes they are trying to figure out, well, you know, is this a safe investment in this area? Is this someplace that I can really set down roots? So I think it's important for you to understand then too, in dealing with those clients, dealing with those customers, to be able to relay to them the information about, here's what's happening in our economy. Here's why you should feel good about investing in this property in whatever part of the state you're in. So that's why I want to take some of this data now that we've talked about and apply it more specifically to these various regions in Colorado, because we recognize that even though we as a state are, we oftentimes talk about the whole state level data, we have so many different stories, so many different levels of activity that are happening throughout the state, depending upon where exactly you are located. So following along with the Colorado Association of Realtors, various districts here, we're going to take a look at data for each of these districts to take a look at what's happening from the employment side within each of those areas. So we're going to start on the western side, which is that area that is showing up in blue. Then we'll move to the mountain region, so there are areas in green. Then we'll go into the northeast Colorado, the yellow part, Metro Denver, the purple part, and then southeast Colorado, which is all showing up in the pink part there. Now, I got to chastise you guys a little bit, because I recognize that some of your boundaries do not follow exactly along county boundaries. And so from an economist standpoint, I have to have county level data. So there are some liberties that I am taking within some of these areas. I understand why you do it. I understand that you have some differences in terms of tracking of activity for your own purposes, but do know that I have had to take a few liberties in some instances as far as where I am including the county level data. But nonetheless, I think that the trends, the stories that we will see are still very, very relevant. Okay, so starting on the western side then, what is happening with employment? Oh, and I should note too, in order, while it was great for Colorado, we were talking about employment data that was through the preliminary data through the end of the year. When you start talking about employment at a county level, there is a lag in the information. And indeed, there's about a 6-month lag in the information. So all we can talk about, or the most recent data that we can talk about right now at those county levels, when you add up all the employment at the county level, is what was going on the middle of last year. So not ideal, but nonetheless, it kind of shows us where we were, and we can think about moving forward where, given the various concentrations of industries, where we are going to be in 2020 and even into 2021 in these various areas. Okay, still looking at our high wage, middle wage, low wage types of industries, recognizing, however, that these may differ according to the geographic area. I'm still keeping it all the same just for comparison purposes, but recognizing that the wage structures in our different parts of the state can be a little bit different. But again, I still think it provides a very good framework for what we have happening. So in Western Colorado, a few things to note. Natural resources and mining tends to be very important out there on our Western side. And that is an industry that is challenged right now. Certainly, we have all been enjoying perhaps the very low gasoline prices that we have been experiencing out there. If you're driving, if you're moving outside of your house at all, you may be enjoying some of those low gas prices. But we're starting to see those prices, the price of oil starting to be more stable, starting to come up to around $50 a barrel. On the western side, it's more important too about what is happening in terms of natural gas prices, which are still low. In terms of the employment activity here, though, the western side of our state has actually been the region of our state that has seen more stable employment. And I say that even with the idea that as of the middle of the year, employment was down by about 9%. If we were to take a look at the same data for the state of Colorado at this point in time, the state of Colorado was down by about 10%. So Western employment being a little more stable, because while retail and leisure and hospitality are certainly important there, they're not as large a component as some of our other bases. And the western side also has a significant retiree population that has been more stable spending patterns there. So the western slope has actually been a little more stable type of economic condition than we've seen in some other areas. The Mountain District, not surprisingly, leisure and hospitality, retail, other services being oh so important within our state's playground area. And certainly when you take a look then at what has been happening in terms of employment there, we see that 50% of the employment base in the Mountain District is made up of those lower wage positions. And we saw a near 30% decline in employment as of the middle of the year. And I know that some of you that may be working within the mountain area are like, well, that certainly, though, is the area of the state where we have seen some of the strongest increases in home sales activity. But it's been those folks that are perhaps working remotely, not necessarily the folks that are working within the hospitality industry within our Mountain District area that are investing in new homes and all there. On the northeast side, so moving up into Larimer and Weld counties, this is where we have the strongest concentration of natural resources and mining activity in the state. Again, Weld County has certainly been the region where we have seen much of that oil and gas extraction activity. Again, same story there where employment within that industry has been challenged. Notice also a very strong concentration of government employment. So the government employment is all of the local employment. So any of your public school systems, your K through 12 public school systems, that gets counted in there. All of your state government employment. So you have Colorado State University, you have Northern Colorado University or University of Northern Colorado located there, where you have all of that public higher education employment also classified within the government area, and then any type of federal government facilities. And we do certainly have some federal government lab opportunities there in the northeast side. So very strong employment concentration of government employment there in the northeast side. Again, some of the lower wage positions on the leisure and hospitality side, I think areas such as Larimer County, Weld County, Boulder County, where we've also been seeing some real challenges with those students that maybe are still in a remote learning environment, those higher ed students that are still in a remote learning environment. Their dollars are not flowing into these local economies as much as they had been. So you still see on that lower wage side about an 18% decline in employment that is happening within those areas there. Metro Denver, this is our most diversified employment sector or segment within the state of Colorado. 63% of the state employment is located in the Metro Denver region. We have, as of the middle of the year, again, professional and business services was a bit challenged at that point in time. Actually, our expectation by the end of the year is this was actually a growing sector again by the end of the year. Information, the highest paid sector, has been very stable. Telecommunications, and high technology being so important to keep everybody connected as they had shifted to remote work or remote learning. Manufacturing also being a very stable source. But again, leisure and hospitality, retail trade down significantly. And then the Southeast District area. This one is a little bit different in that a lot of the employment and all in this area is also dominated by military types of operations. When you think back to what happens in El Paso County. So clarification here, though, military employment or military people on the base are not counted as employees. All of this data is only civilian employees. Nonetheless, there are certainly a lot of governmental operations tied to the military operations there, and some of that employment is indeed counted there. On the professional and business services side, this has been a region too where cybersecurity has been really one of the key shining stars in this area. A lot of operations there, a lot of high-tech operations that are happening to really provide some good, solid performance there. And notice that in terms of at the midpoint of the year, it was the Western Slope as well as the Southeast District where employment was much more stable than what we were seeing elsewhere in the state of Colorado. Okay, well, that was a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of looking at slicing and dicing that data by different geographic regions and everything. So now I want to totally shift gear, turn our attention now to commercial real estate. Now, I recognize that most of you are going to be on the residential real estate side, but I think it's also important to think about how that, because commercial real estate too is such an important component of our communities. It certainly flavors how we look at our communities, that it's important to have an understanding too as to what's changing with that and how that may influence our perceptions of the various communities. Now, caveat though, all commercial real estate, indeed all residential real estate, is local. So, and unfortunately on the commercial real estate side, there's not a lot of good data to really do good comparative statistics from one part of the state to another that is kind of a uniform way of looking at the data. Sorry about that, but what we are going to do then is really focus on just the Metro Denver trends. But I want you also to think about, are these trends that I am seeing too within the community in which I am working? Because I think that some of the trends that are influencing office, industrial, and retail are pretty much the same trends all across the state, but that's certainly something that we can talk about, whether there are some differences there. On the office side, yes, we are seeing an increase in vacancy rates on the office side. We're starting to see more stability in the lease rates. On the office side, again, with that lease or the occupancy, the vacancy rate increasing on the office side, a lot of that too is because of sublease space. So companies that had leased space originally are now saying, I'm kind of pulling back on my operations or whatever, and now more of that sublease space has been hitting the market. That has been especially true for oil and gas companies, because a lot of those oil and gas companies, even though the drilling activity and all is happening out in Weld County, happening in Western Colorado, many of their office operations are located in Metro Denver. So definitely changing conditions as we have moved to remote work. So the big question, where is the office market going? So I am in the camp that says, give all of us a year of working from home. We are going to be so ready to be back with our peeps, to be back out into the office environment. And I do think that this is a very temporary type of shift in the office side, and that we will actually see companies that are saying, there's so much about our company culture, about that interaction that fosters innovation within our companies, that we want to be able to bring people back together once again. So yes, I think that the key is going to be flexibility, that there are going to be companies that they'll say, maybe you don't have to be in the office 5 days a week and that 3 days is sufficient. So flexibility is going to be the key, but I do think that the office market is still going to come through this okay. Industrial, it has been crazy to watch this as all of us have shifted our expenditure patterns to more online types of spending as opposed to physical spending. The industrial market has had to respond by increasing logistical operations so that we can get those packages in a one-day delivery. Okay, maybe that's been a little hard these days, but nonetheless, that these logistical operations, think Amazon or other your favorite e-commerce operations, have certainly been expanding their space to try to bring it closer to where that population base is that is ordering the goods that they are delivering. Nonetheless, still have seen a little bit of an increase in the vacancy rate there on the industrial side, mainly because we have added so much space. In the Metro Denver region, we have added 5 million square feet of industrial space or more for the past 5 years, 2021 being the 5th year where this is going to be an occurrence there. So it has been a huge amount of space that has been added. And it's not only the logistical space. Think back to the conversations too about the manufacturing base, bioscience increasing, aerospace increasing. So certainly on the industrial side, it is also an expansion of space for those various manufacturing operations in addition to the logistical operations. Retail has been a little painful. Again, because of various business restrictions and all, that's where we have seen some vacancy rates that have been rising at a little faster pace than perhaps some of the other market segments. I believe that the savvy retailers are the ones that are going to be figuring out, how do I maintain a physical presence so that people can still come in and touch and feel with the goods that they want. But I also know that they may come in, touch and feel it in the store, and then they're going to go home and order it online. All right. So I think that, again, the retailers that are the ones that are going to do best in our new world here will be those that have figured out how to really provide the marriage of that online presence with the physical presence. Construction activity on our commercial side has been huge then. In the Metro Denver region, 2018 was a peak year in terms of new office, industrial, and retail construction. We added over 11.5 million square feet in that single year. It was huge. In 2021, it's still going to be pretty huge. Our expectation is about 10 million square feet that will still be completed in 2021. So again, think about the trends within the districts in which you are operating, whether you have been experiencing some of this same type of influence on your office, industrial, your retail patterns within your local communities. I'm guessing that, again, that many of the influences are the same all across the state, but at different magnitudes. Turning now to our consumers, how you and I get out there, spend our dollars, and also talking about the whole population change, because I recognize that that is something also critical to home sales activity, because it's people that buy those homes. And so you want to know what's happening in terms of people growth within our state. So 2020, 2021, are expected to be some of our slowest population growth years in recent history here in the state of Colorado. So this chart actually goes back to 1990 because there is something really important that was a distinction that was happening at that point compared to currently. So first of all, just to get your bearings, the green bars along the bottom, that's natural increase, that's births, less deaths here in Colorado, versus the net migration. That's the number of people moving in versus the number of people moving out of the state. Notice that in the 1990s, that's when our population here in Colorado increased at a significantly faster pace than even what we saw in the 2000 decade or into the teen decade, the 2010 decade here as well. So yes, there were certainly a lot of folks that were saying, oh my gosh, you started to hear the pressures about our population has been increasing too much. We got too many people coming in and that type of thing. Keep in mind, the 1990s were actually a year of much more significant growth than what we had recently experienced. 2020, 2021, again, some lower population growth years. And this has been not just a Colorado trend, but a whole nationwide trend. From 2019 to 2020 at the national level, our population increased by 0.35%. That was it. Usually the US population has been increasing just under 1%. A lot of that is because of immigration law changes. So we weren't having as many people from elsewhere in the globe moving into our country, but also some other patterns that are not unexpected. If you look at the natural increase here in 2020 in Colorado, you will the reason for that decline there is because our deaths were higher and we were not introducing as many babies into the world as well. Big question then, as we start moving out, are those young couples going to start having more babies once again? And certainly that's kind of part of the expectation. And we are hoping too that what we have seen in terms of the increase in the death rate will start to pull back to regular normal levels once again as well. As we look forward then, on average, Colorado has typically increased by about 75,000 people per year. We're not going to see that over the next few years. Indeed, again, the population increase is going to be more along the lines of 50,000 people in 2020 and in 2021, and then start to get back to a more normal growth pattern, if you will, for the state by about the middle of the decade. So one of the things that, delving into our whole population growth in a little more detail, I want to take a look at our population growth by the various generational groups, not because I want to, spark any type of angst between baby boomers and millennials or anything like that, but because it's important to understand that spending patterns, home purchasing patterns are oh so different depending upon where you're at in this whole age spectrum. So this chart shows the number of people of each age group from 0, or those babies, all the way out to 100 years old here, and divides them out into the various generational groups, color coding them. The numbers up above the chart tell you how many people are within that various generational group. Few things to note. Millennials, those are that folks within our millennial generation right now are our largest population group here in Colorado. And think about too, a lot from a home sale position, if you're looking at people have been kind of delaying purchases of those homes until they're around the 30 or so, you look at this right now, that's where the bulk of our population is here in Colorado. Notice our oldest millennials right now are turning 40 in 2021. After the millennials, then it's the Gen Z. It's that next generation, that next workforce that is coming up. Many of the older Gen Z are now in college and will soon be really becoming that very significant force within our labor force here in Colorado. Then we have the Gen Xers that have been a very stable influence on our Colorado economy. And then finally, the boomers. The boomers had been the largest population group in Colorado up until about probably 5-10 years ago. And now we are the fourth, because that's where I am at. That's now the fourth largest population group here. Boomers are oh so important yet. Now, you may not see them purchasing homes as frequently as perhaps the millennials. Indeed, right now they're suggesting that the millennials are really the bulk of, over 50% of the home purchases are happening by millennial households. But the boomers is where the wealth is. And that's important when we start talking about consumer activity. Notice this Gen Alpha here. That's the new population group. That's kind of what they're calling it right now. I think it's kind of interesting because this is the first generational group that will have all of their birth years within the 21st century. Otherwise, all of the other generational groups have kind of tracked. Also back in the 1900s, if you will. So again, as I had mentioned, part of the reason why this is important to understand what is happening with our different generational groups is what is happening in terms of the assets, the liabilities, the wealth, if you will. So the boomer households own 50% of the assets, and this is national data. The baby boomers own 50% of the assets out there. So 50% of the wealth, essentially, in the country is owned by those boomer households. The millennials, our largest population group, they own just 8% of the wealth that is out there. Now, not surprising because, again, they're relatively new, quote unquote, in terms of collecting that wealth, of moving into a whole career path that allows them to start accumulating wealth. But so that is, even though the millennials are the ones that have are the largest population group, the largest part of our labor force. Again, some of that wealth creation, they're at the beginning stages of that. And when you take a look at the liabilities of that, again, notice now the millennials starting to take on more and more of those home mortgages, more and more of that liability for that. But most of our home mortgage debt lying in the hands of the Gen Xers. Again, a very stable type of group out there. So this becomes important again in terms of thinking about how our retail expenditure patterns and household purchasing patterns going to be varying across the state of Colorado. So turning to those, first of all, those retail patterns. This is national level data, again, showing how we consumers have responded to COVID. In many cases, what has happened has been COVID has accelerated some of the spending pattern trends as opposed to really shifting them a whole lot. And that I'm talking more in the case of non-store retailers, which is Economist geek speak for all of the e-commerce activities. We had already seen a shift happening in terms of the importance of e-commerce activities for our consumers out there that just accelerated all throughout COVID. And indeed, that was the segment of our expenditure patterns that increased at the fastest pace in 2020. Food and beverage stores, we've also seen some significant increases in activity there because, as I say, we're still eating and drinking. So we're going to those grocery stores, we're going to those liquor stores. Building materials, garden equipment, and supplies. Given how many of our workers here in the state of Colorado were able to shift to remote work or shifted to remote learning, we've been trying to spruce up our spaces a little bit more, and we're certainly seeing that in the national level data in terms of increases there. On the downside, food services and drinking places, or our bars and restaurants, that's where we've seen a decline in activity. Gas stations were not driving as much. And also clothing and clothing accessory stores. This has been a challenge for a lot of our downtown areas, a lot of our mall areas, because all of these soft good purchases have certainly shifted out of some of what has been happening in those brick and mortar stores. Some of it may have shifted to the non-store retailers up here, but in general, the tracking of the expenditures at the physical stores, clothing and clothing accessories has been significantly down because, if you're online on screen, you don't necessarily need to have the wardrobe that maybe you once did there. Moving into Colorado activity, Colorado has seen a more pronounced change in retail activity, and generally that towards the negative, if you will, than what we have been seeing at a national level. So retail activity as a whole here in Colorado, grocery stores in particular, those both increasing by 10% or so. That increase has been slower than what we have seen at a national level. Healthcare workers, And healthcare has also been one of these industries where we look to them and we're like, oh, thank goodness for those healthcare workers. You have been so important during this period of time. Recognizing that healthcare spending, however, is down. And this has created some real severe challenges for our hospitals and our medical professions because of the decline in elective procedures that has been happening. This is important too, all throughout the state of Colorado, because many of the hospitals in our rural parts of the state have been even more challenged in terms of spending patterns than what we have been seeing along the Front Range, more the urbanized areas. And then taking a look then to what has been happening in terms of these high touch industries, our experience industries, restaurants and hotels down by 44% in Colorado, transportation, that's all of our air travel as well as mass transit, as well as, that Uber and Lyft driver that maybe you had relied upon before as well. Transportation down significantly, entertainment and recreation, again, our spending at everything from concert halls to museums to theaters to, yes, even at our ski areas there. That expenditure pattern down even more steeply than what we are seeing at a national level. Okay. Zeroing in on the different parts of our state, then, I want to focus on on the population generational groups within the different parts of the state, because again, these tell some very different stories about what is happening here in Colorado. So again, sticking with the same color theme and everything else, the Metro District, 57% of the state's population is located in the Denver metropolitan area. However, the fastest growth is expected in the neighbors to the north there in that Northeast district, where population is expected to increase by about 21% over the next 10 years versus most other parts of the state experiencing about a 12% increase over that 10-year period, or a little over 1% growth in most parts of the state, but a little bit faster in the Northeast part. So in the Western District, first of all, boomers are the largest population segment in the Western area. And again, this may, think back to when I was talking about the retirees in the Western side. This is certainly where we are seeing that the boomer generation has been, is the significant driving economic force there. Not only do they have the wealth, but that's where they are, a lot of them choosing to live within the state as well. Millennials, where the largest population group in the state of Colorado, is fourth when it comes to the Western District. So again, if the millennials are where we are expecting a lot of that home sale activity to be coming from the Western District, you might, think about whether or not that key markets, how to respond to that key market segment that is smaller on the Western side there. Mountain District, millennials are the largest population group there. And when you think about it, again, a lot of those millennials are the workforce, the fuel for the entertainment and recreation industries that are located there. So it's not surprising that you see a strong concentration there, but you also see a very strong concentration in the boomers. And this goes to the whole idea that many of the boomers are purchasing those homes, are now living up in that area. Maybe they're moving out of the urban core, but maybe they're now choosing to live up in our state's playground area there. On the Northeast District, again, this is the fastest growing area in terms of population growth. Notice that the Gen Zers are the largest component of that population. Remember, who's up there? We've got both Colorado State University and UNC that is located up there. So again, these Gen Zers, the oldest Gen Zers, our college age population, big concentration of what we have there in the Northeast area. Chances are they're not the ones that are buying the homes quite yet, but good, strong concentration of millennials there on the north side, and a good, strong concentration of boomers too that have the wealth on the northeast side. In the Metro District area, this is where, again, millennials are the strongest population group or the largest population group. Again, this goes to the whole diversity of the employment base, that many of these folks are those that are starting their careers or continuing their careers. So the diversity of the employment base here also attracts kind of the diversity of the population here as well. Look at those too. All of those upcoming, just turning 30. Those are your home purchasers right there. So that millennial group being very important here in the Metro District in terms of new home sales ultimately. On the southeast side, strong concentration of both the Gen Zers and the millennials, the younger millennials, I should say, the older Gen Zers, younger millennials, because military population. That's where we tend to have a lot of the concentration of the military folks would be within those age groups. So it's not surprising that our Southeast District kind of dominated by folks within that, kind of 19-ish to about 30-year age group there. All right. Turning finally then to residential real estate. I mean, we've been talking about it all along about how the employment patterns and the population growth patterns would certainly be influencing the type of residential activity that we have here in the state and indeed within each of your regions. So median home prices, what I focus on in the economic development world, and because in economic development, we're trying to, help those businesses grow and expand, attract new businesses to this area. One of the things that businesses are always asking is, well, can my workers afford to live there? So we look very closely at this whole differential between the red line here, which is our US, and what we see happening in terms of median home prices elsewhere in the state of Colorado, and more specifically in the Denver MSA and the Boulder MSA, because those are the two MSAs that are included in that National Association of Realtors quarterly report that looks at data at a metropolitan area there. So Boulder, 7th most expensive metropolitan statistical area in the country, according to the NAR. That's out of 181 metropolitan areas that they track in that quarterly report. The Denver MSA, number 13. The median home price, and this is kind of, mushing and mashing data together, but the median home price, according to the Colorado Association of Realtors, fits in there kind of in between the US level and the Denver MSA level, with a median home price of around $432,000. Now, you guys were busy in 2020. Oh my golly, it was the year of the strongest increase in sales activity that we have seen here in Colorado, 9% increase overall in terms of homes being sold throughout the state of Colorado. Depending upon which market you work in, you could have been even busier than that. For example, the mountain market, that's where we were seeing increases in home sales activity by 30 to 50% versus Metro, Southeast, Northeast. We could have been looking at 5 to 10% types of increases in home sales activity there. Our expectation for 2021 is that you're still going to be busy, but don't expect necessarily a 9% increase overall in the state of Colorado. We do see that some of the activity that happened in the latter part of 2020 was some pent up demand, because there were a couple of months in there when home sales activity was certainly challenged because of various business restrictions and everything. So we don't expect that the pace of home sales activity is going to continue at that same level in 2021 as what you saw in 2020. Nonetheless, I do think that in terms of the number of homes sold, there was over 120,000 sold in 2020. I still think that that number is going to be pretty high. But again, the increase in activity is going to be a little bit lower. In terms of new construction activity, there are some parts of the state that are still in desperate need of new homes. New home construction is still lacking in some parts. And again, that is why we have seen such very strong increases in some of the prices, because we have had a very strong demand and a limited supply. I don't need to tell you that inventory levels have been down by 50% compared to where they had been in 2019 or even prior years than that. So yes, we do need some new homes. We saw a little bit of a downturn in terms of new building permits issued in 2019. That increased a bit in 2020, and we expect that to increase a bit more in 2021. Our expectation, too, is that the single-family detached new home market is where we're going to see a little more of the activity happening than perhaps on that multifamily side. So turning then to what is happening within our different districts then. First, looking at prices on the single family detached market side, again, that mountain community, those mountain communities shown in the green bars here, that's where we have seen some of these strongest levels of home appreciation. That's where we see some of the most expensive homes as well, versus in our western area, Moffat, Mesa, and Montezuma counties, we tend to see lower median home prices. I mean, what a crazy story of differences within our whole state of Colorado, with our median home prices ranging from $200,000 in Moffat County up to about $1.2 million in Eagle County. And we offer things in all price ranges in between there. And just as a note, I mean, we've pulled out these kind of representative counties for the different districts there, just to be able to talk a little bit about changes that we are seeing there. Notice that in the metro district area, that's where we're also seeing the most expensive housing prices outside of the metro district. But our appreciation rates have been a little bit lower than elsewhere. And I think a lot of that because median home prices had been increasing so rapidly in the Metro Denver region for a number of years that now we're starting to see a little more stability in those home prices. And also when you take a look at construction activity, that we're seeing that we've kind of filled in the gap of the lack of construction activity that had happened during the Great Recession. And so seeing a little more stable supply from that standpoint, still very restricted in terms of inventory actually available for sale there. Very similar story on the single family attached marketplace, again, ranging dramatically in terms of those median home prices from Moffat County on the low side up to Eagle County on the high side. Appreciation rates, though, have been while still increasing. I mean, keep in mind that this scale here is very different than the prior chart scale, because we've had areas such as Montezuma County where we have seen near 100% increases in the median home prices in that marketplace in 2020. Just huge there. But again, starting to see a little more stability, like in our Metro Denver marketplace. Larimer and Weld County holding very steady on the northeast side. Southeast, we're still, again, one of those areas where we have seen more stable employment patterns, as well as on the western slope side, more stable employment patterns. Those are also the regions where home affordability is still a little more what you can experience than other parts, perhaps, of the metro region. Whoa! So with that was a lot of information and data and and delving into what we have seen happening throughout the state of Colorado. And now I welcome any questions, conversation that you all want to have. Robert, I turn it over to you.
Wow. Ouch. That's a lot of data. Thank you. My head's spinning from it. We've got just about 8 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand in the chat, or raise your hand in the participant box, and we will get you unmuted and get your question answered. So I'm trying to scan this, so put your hand up, whoever's got questions. Questions? No one in this group has questions? Oh, I'm stunned. But yeah, excellent data. And yeah, oh, wait, we can go to 11:30, I hear. So we can answer some questions. I have Janine Dolly. Let's unmute her and get her to ask her question. Janine, you are unmuted.
Awesome, thank you. What do you expect the impact will be in Colorado regarding decreasing the oil and gas industry?
So one of the great question in terms of, and let me take a step back to just talk about our energy industry here in Colorado. So yes, while I was, and when we were taking a look at the employment in natural resources and mining segment, and I really focused kind of on what is happening in oil and gas. What I didn't mention is that on the manufacturing side is where we see too a lot of the renewable energy facilities. So think about wind energy such as Vestas. Vestas has some huge operations in the state of Colorado, ranging from some of their nacelle production to wind blade production up in Weld County and down into Pueblo as well. So while I'm concerned about what is happening on our natural resources side in Colorado, especially because many of our, we could extend that conversation too to not just oil and gas, to what is happening on our coal production side as well here in Colorado, which influences many of our rural parts of the state, especially in kind of that northwest corner of the state and western side. So while I am concerned about what will happen to our oil and gas workers, to our coal miners throughout the state of Colorado, it is going to be challenging, as they are going to be required basically to shift, to learn new skills, to be able to take those skills into other industries. Great opportunities within the renewable energy side here in Colorado, but there is going to be some short-term damage done by the changes in oil and gas here in Colorado.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? Raise your hand and we will get you unmuted. I don't. David DeLana, let's unmute him.
A great presentation. Thank you so much. The information is almost overwhelming because there's such a varied statistical analysis that's being used in the different matrices. The thing that was interesting that you were talking about, and I'm wanting to get your spin on what you're seeing from another sector that ties in very closely to us, and that's the availability of lumber as it relates to the new build. So in my experience with Arapahoe, Douglas, and several of, Denver County, et cetera, the builders are literally raising prices every 4 homes sold, or in the event of being a time, every 2 weeks, they're raising prices between $4,000 and $6,000. And one of the attributing factors they're utilizing or saying is it's due to lack of lumber. Have we seen anything regarding what is behind this? I understand perhaps wildfires and COVID closings of the mills, but is there something else going on that is causing this dramatic increase in prices of new build homes? Thank you.
So the whole issue of lumber, I mean, and Dr. Yoon had touched upon that as well, regarding the rapid increases in lumber prices. Yes, I think a lot of that is related to wildfires in the Great Northwest, related to wildfires here in Colorado. I mean, not that we have a whole lot of lumber activities here in Colorado, but the areas that we do in Grand County, which is, like if the Kremlin area had been one region where we used to have some of the lumbering operations, and that area being devastated by wildfires. So certainly that was one challenge. I think too, in terms of importation of lumber from a lot of the Canadian markets, that has been challenged over time with various trade restrictions and that type of thing. And keep in mind, it's not just though the lumber prices, it's construction labor. As I talked about in Metro Denver, how commercial real estate construction has been at these peak levels. Not only is it in terms of that non-residential construction activity, we have a lot of infrastructure construction activity that is happening in various parts of the state, from Denver International Airport to various highway projects and all. So the residential construction labor has been challenged as well. So seeing some increases in terms of wages and all for that industry, and just other raw materials too. So it's not just lumber that is driving the price, I don't think, but it really is the whole kind of production cost.
Excellent, thank you. David Anderson has his hand up. David, you're good. Go ahead. David still with us? Did we lose him? Okay, I'm gonna go on to a question that comes from Elizabeth Peets. Do you have any indications about what the end of the eviction moratorium or rental assistance period in 2021 might do in terms of affecting the housing market, both residential and commercial?
Oh, there we go. I got muted somewhere along the way there. All right, there we go. So I think that the various moratoriums and rental restrictions have been absolutely necessary in this point in time. I think it is going to be a challenge because even though, like on the rental side, or whether it's even on a mortgage side, eventually you still got to pay those bills. Even if you have been, have done some type of reduced rent or some type of workout on some of the mortgages, eventually you have to pay those dollars. It still is going to be challenging. And I think that that's kind of one of the key reasons why, as we talked about, that at the worst case scenario, it's 3 years to totally come back from this, because there are going to be still fits and starts and challenges along the way. Even as some companies are able to pick right back up, the whole financial impact of being able to scale up very quickly after seeing your income so dramatically reduced during this period of time, it takes some recovery. So I think that on the rental side, it's going to take some time for recovery. And so that's why, there are some economists that are like, whoa, because of all the wealth that the boomers have, because of this 15% in the savings rate, we're going to see this huge increase once again in consumer activity. Keep in mind, there's a lot of folks out there where that huge increase in activity is not going to be able to happen. And I think a lot of those are our renters out there.
Excellent, thank you. I want to back up to one question that just came up. do you see, and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, do you see politics impacting lumber supply and the residential real estate industry?
Oh, interesting. To the extent that any type of Canadian imports of lumber or any other imports across the globe, for that matter, of various building materials. I mean, yes, I mean, the whole idea of trade restrictions or tariffs or whatever, all of that plays into it. I think that this new administration is perhaps a little more open to negotiations with various countries on products. So, but all that remains to be seen. But yes, politics definitely plays a part in it when you talk about global trade. It's just the reality.
Yeah. There's a couple here that I'm gonna pull real quick, and one of them is any thoughts on the Gallagher Amendment issue and how it might affect our population and pricing?
So the Gallagher Amendment, again, because of now that we can let the residential assessment ratio and the commercial assessment ratio perhaps stay in position basically for a while. I mean, what we had been seeing over many years was that residential assessment ratio coming down and down and down, because that's where our a lot of the construction activity, a lot of the increase in real estate value out there was on that residential side, which then forced kind of that whole decline in that assessment ratio. Now that we are going to be holding that residential assessment ratio more stable, this means great things, actually, I think, for our rural communities in particular, and for our businesses more in general. For our rural communities in particular, because the shift in residential versus non-residential property values was really driven by activity that was going on along the Front Range, the urbanized areas where you had strong increases in residential values. Who paid the price of it was in our rural communities, where that assessment ratio for residential properties was going down. They couldn't necessarily raise mill levies because of Tabor requirements. So they were not experiencing the increase in residential values like was being experienced elsewhere. So I think now this allows some opportunities for our rural parts of the state to experience more stable budgets, more stable opportunities, which means great things for our school districts across the state, because they are generally the largest recipient of property tax revenue within the state of Colorado. So I am hoping that this will lead to more stable, more predictable changes in governmental revenues all across the state of Colorado.
Okay, I'm gonna try two more real quick, and Deborah, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna destroy your last name, Deborah LePerc. Can we unmute Deborah and have her ask her question?
Thank you for this beautiful presentation on the economy, and particularly focus in Colorado. It's tremendous. My question is, what employment is drawing customers to Mesa and Montezuma counties in condo and townhome properties?
So on the Western Slope has been some pretty stable employment positions. So that whole Western district there. So one of the things, again, because of the population base there, again, a lot of retiree influence, which tends to, some of that spending pattern tends to be a little more stable, perhaps. I would also, however, note that what is happening on the Western side is an increased manufacturing activity. They have been very successful recently on the Western Slope side of attracting some manufacturers, attracting expansion of manufacturing operations. I mean, a lot of this related to the manufacturing operations related to outdoor activities. So I can think of, like, there is a company that does a lot of fly rides that has been expanding operations on the western side. Also, what I think is helping to provide some stability on the western side too, is that they are a region that is more, what do I want to say, they're a more stable area too for the provision of some of the various residential services. So healthcare, I mean, they not only serve the healthcare needs of the population that lives there, but they also serve the healthcare needs of folks bordering in Utah and that whole western part of the state of Colorado there. So I think that's providing some more stability out there as well. And again, on the entertainment and recreation side, just that it's an area known also for all of the recreational opportunities there, and that whole region of the state has really been trying to capitalize on that as well.
Perfect, thank you. And we're going to try one more. David Anderson, we're going to try again. So we'll unmute David and see if we can get his question.
Can you hear me now?
We got you. We got you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Patty, for all the great information. What are your predictions for Pueblo County?
You know, that is has been something that we have been watching and just so excited about finally. You know, going back to the prior question too about what is happening on the western slope, it was many years coming to see more stable improvements on the western slope. That's kind of how I feel about the Pueblo area too. It's been many years coming to see more stability in employment opportunities and everything there in the Pueblo area. I think some of what is, you know, Pueblo, of course, long history of steel manufacturing there. I've heard that they are starting to kick up a little bit of operations again on the steel side. So there's that positive going on, but also on the renewable energy side with some of the Vestas operations down in there, that's helping to provide some more stability to that area as well. On the tourism side too, I mean, Pueblo has been very engaged in trying to develop their whole Riverwalk area and really trying to enhance some of the cultural and entertainment attractions within that community. So that's providing some opportunities there. And also what's going on both in Pueblo as well as on the western slope side, the affordability of the region is a real attraction as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Patty. I am going to wrap us up here. I want to thank you for your incredible amount of data and information. It is, I took a page of notes myself just in that. I want to thank our sponsor, First Bank. Thank Kaylee from First Bank for that. Dr. Lawrence Yoon, Patty, yourself. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget, tomorrow we will be back for the second day. Jump on and thank you all. Have a great day and enjoy it. The sun's out here, at least in the snow. So take care. Thank you all.